Hello, this is Mark Sabatella from Outside Shore Music. In this video, I want to make an observation about rests. And this is kind of a subtle point that I don't hear people talk about this very often, I guess because it is kind of subtle, but it is somewhat significant sometimes. And the point is this, that a rest that occurs, well, first of all, let's say I'm talking about these rests here that are occurring somewhere within a measure, not big long series of empty measures. Obviously silence is silence, but when you just have an individual rest within a measure, it's doing one of two things. It's either just shortening a note without changing the fundamental rhythm, or it's actually changing the fundamental rhythm. So what I mean by this is, if we look at this first example here, I have two quarter notes. If I play them on the piano, it sounds like that. The next example is going to sound almost identical, except the second note is shorter. But if I clap them, is the first one, is the second one, they're identical clapped, right? The only difference was how long that note was. And frankly, I could have gotten the same effect by writing the quarter note and putting a staccato dot on it. So I'm not saying these rests aren't important at all, but it's a rest that doesn't change the fundamental rhythm. Same with this next example. This is a dotted quarter and an eighth versus, the only difference was how long that first note was held. The second note happened at exactly the same time. Whereas this next example here, I have, and then if I put that rest at the beginning of the pattern, I have, well, suddenly it's very different. I'm playing fewer notes. It's a different rhythm. So, how do we know the difference? Can you tell the difference just by looking at it, which it's going to be? Yes, you can. If the rest occurs at the beginning of one of these groupings, one of these two beat groupings, or two beat groupings are what's typical in 4/4. There's different groupings for other time signatures, but if it occurs at the beginning of that grouping, then it's going to be a different sound than if there was a note there. But if the rest occurs anywhere within the grouping, then it's really just shortening the note that came before it. And so there really is sort of a fundamental difference between rests at the beginning of a grouping versus rests anywhere else in the grouping. And I don't know, you could maybe find this somewhat useful if you are trying to transcribe something, doing a rhythmic dictation, but also if you're writing for instruments like percussion especially, where the duration of a note doesn't really matter whether you write a quarter note or an eighth note for snare drum. It's going to sound the same, so you can kind of use this difference in duration to your advantage sometime. That's kind of a whole other topic. But anyhow, the main point here is that rests at the beginning of a grouping, they're significant. They mean there's an actual note that isn't being played, but a rest in the middle of a grouping somewhere just really means the previous note is a little shorter than it otherwise would have been, but it still sounds the same when clapped out. I don't know, maybe that's a little thought-provoking, maybe it's confusing, but anyhow, it's something that I've been thinking about lately and wanted to share.